Welcome to the L3 podcast, also known as Love, Lies, and Lifestyles. No living person is exempt from love, the lies, and living a particular lifestyle. From sex to building wealth, this show is solely to entertain, enlighten, and empower. All topics discussed are strictly the opinion of the host and the guests that appear on the show. Here's your host, Dr. K. Hey y'all, welcome to another episode on L3. I'm so excited this week. I'm excited every week, as you all know, but I really do get excited because I have some really great guests that come on the show to talk about amazing things that a lot of you really want to hear about. A lot of what's been happening in the country right now is the talk around policing and defunding the police. And there's been a lot of mixed reviews around what that means. You have one side where they are outraged and feel like there's law and order that this country needs to maintain and that we shouldn't defund the police. And then we have the other side where they're all for defunding the police. I have a very special guest on the show today, Barry Felder, who is a New York City retired police officer and detective. And we're going to talk through a lot of what defund the police means, what policing has looked like in Black and Brown communities, and his experience on the force when he was working in New York City. So please welcome my guest, Barry Felder. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you very much, Miss Karen.
Yes.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to have you on the show. For the longest, I've kept saying, like, I really want to talk to police officers. I've always believed in like hearing both sides. And I think that's where we get to agreement and understanding. And oftentimes we're not talking, I guess, if you want to call it the other side. And our community, we don't want to feel like it's the other side. So I want to talk through a lot of things that people either aren't in agreement with or they just have a misunderstanding about when we start talking about policing. So let's first actually talk about defunding the police and your takeaway and understanding around what does that mean for police officers and police departments, and what does that mean for the community?
Well, I think that using the term, first of all, defunding, seems to me to be a little inflammatory, and it stirs up more emotion than it does logic. And I think that people immediately, when they hear defunding the police, the immediate response and association is that you're just going to take away either a chunk of the budget within the police department, or you're going to reduce the number of police officers on a particular law enforcement agency, or you are going to simply disband that department and rebuild it. So you have those things going on, those dynamics, and I think a lot of confusion, like you said, comes about because the police officers may view it as an attack on not just their authority, but the job itself, because there is a us against them kind of mentality that's established from department heads to department heads. So you have different cultures depending on the leadership. So to get back to it, real more focus, I think that defunding the police department should really center around things in reducing maybe the number of police officers you have in proportion to the amount of crime you have. So we went through an era here in the city where every politician was bragging about how the crime numbers were down and there are fewer violent crimes. So if that's the case, then you don't need to increase your department number-wise as far as the amount of officers you actually have. So those type of things need to be addressed, where you have a proportionate number of officers in comparison to the actual crime rate. I think it's a very simple approach. Other thing, I'm sorry.
Well, okay, so I'm hearing you talking about like when you hear defund the police, it sounds inflammatory, and it creates a further divide with the us against them. So my understanding when people are saying defund the police, it's about taking, instead of allocating $500 million to a police department, like some cities have done, instead reallocating that funding to services to help the community, such as mental health services, social workers, like people who actually know how to deal with people in crisis, rather than criminalizing behaviors of when people are in need.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I understand that, but I was just giving you actually just the side of, pretty much like the PD side. And yes, you're absolutely right. That's what, if you want to use that term, the other side, what the proponents for defund the police believe. And they're correct, because probably about 80% of your time on patrol as a cop is service related. So that you're not really preventing or enforcing a lot of crime. Most of your time is spent serving the public. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to medical services and things of that nature, you really do need people that know what they're doing. I mean, I can respond to someone's house, someone that's in distress, that some sort of mental issue. I'm not a psychologist.
Right. Yeah. So in the sense of knowing that that's what people are proposing, and now, to be honest with you, I agree. I don't think that was the right word to use, because immediately it sounds, especially when people don't have understanding, defunding immediately sounds like just get rid of police, right? And that we don't need police in society. And so that's where it sparked outrage, especially when in communities when they've seen the police as protectors. In the community I grew up in, the police were not seen as protectors, right? So I think maybe the wording also is what's throwing people off. Do you believe that, given in spirit of what defunding really means, do you believe that the police should be defunded? Police departments should be defunded?
Certain aspects, yes. I think you have to cherry pick. Like personally, from the average police budget, I think that technology actually does help. Having computers and having programs and things of that nature, which may expedite, say, investigations, or expedite exonerating people and things of that nature. I think you need technology. So you shouldn't take away from that aspect of the budget. But like I said, as far as personnel goes, I think you could reduce some of the numbers, and even you could probably do it through attrition. A lot of people retire year after year after year. Take that away. Some of that funding, and you mentioned it before, with regards to allocating some of the money towards social services. I think a lot of it should go towards education. If you take that money away from the police departments around the country, because if you attempt through education, especially in the schools, to restructure the mindset of young kids with regards to the police and their actual purpose, that through generations may change some of the default settings that people already have, because people are raised in their homes, and depending on your socioeconomic status or your demographics, whatever, you have a particular view of the police that's passed on to you from your parents. So somebody there on an educational basis to really kind of set the record straight. Because as a kid, unless you have an interaction with a cop,
right,
you just know what you see on TV and what you heard coming out of your parents' mouth.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right, especially because the training is not provided on how to deal with children, and not children in crisis, right? Like, you're trained to deal with criminals, not children in crisis. So when kids are kicked out of classrooms for crying too long, and I've witnessed that, and then a school resource officer comes in, because they don't know how to stop the child from crying, they often put them in handcuffs. And I mean, that's just not okay. One of the stories in Florida of the police officer who arrested a 6-year-old girl because she had a meltdown. She's 6. That's what 6-year-olds do. Right? Like, I mean, what? I mean, her grandmother was mortified. The child was terrified and literally took her out, put her in the car, brought her to the police station, and took her mugshot. She's 6.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the things that people don't understand happen in our community.
Correct.
This happens in our community with children that look like me. And so you're right. I do believe that that funding needs to go to education, and get more social workers and psychologists, just anybody who's nurses, and adequate training for teachers on how to support kids in crisis and not call to have them removed, because when the SRO comes in, it only escalates.
Yes.
You know, I was watching one news clipping where kids were talking about in a school, I forgot which city it was in, and these kids were talking about how they created a padded room, a padded closet, in a room where they put the kids if they don't stop crying.
Wow.
And these kids were talking about how terrifying that room was. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, how is this? How are people not outraged by this? Right. But then I also realized a lot of people don't know that this is even happening.
Correct.
You know?
And you know what winds up happening? And first of all, I thought that corporal punishment was had ended in most schools, because that sounds like corporal punishment. But
oh no, in some states they still have the paddle. I've worked in some states. I've worked in pretty much almost every state in this country in schools, and in some states, they actually still use the paddle with kids. Oh yeah.
Yeah, there has to be a different model that you want to institute, because that's not going to help a young child paddle, and it sends out a poor message anyway. I mean, on all different kinds of levels, to punish a child in that manner. But yes, back to the education part, you're absolutely right. Cops, I've always felt that from the very beginning when I came on the job, because years ago, before school safety, they always had a school officer that was assigned. A cop would be assigned to the school. And you're right. There's really no reason for an officer to actually be in the school. And it creates an air of intimidation.
Yes.
Where that isn't what school is about. You're not there to threaten the kids. So,
Right.
just being in uniform a lot of times does your presence. It does disturb, the setting. And of course, it depends on where, but most people see it as an authoritarian type of presence. So you already have a principal, an assistant principal, you have a dean, you have maybe several deans, and you have the educator. So there's no need for the police in the school. There's an incident, you can just pick up the phone, dial 911.
Well, Barry, I've said, I wrote an article a couple years back, and I was talking about how to have conversations about race in school. Right? And now look where we're at. And I've been pushing for these conversations for years. And what I've said in that article was that our schools are built like prisons, right? You have bars outside on the window. And then you have metal detectors that kids have to walk through, put their hands up, empty their backpacks, spread their legs, be searched down, right? And correction, it's not every single school across the US, right? But I mean, I've been in more than enough schools where this is common. And then the principal is equivalent to the warden, and the teachers are equivalent to correction officers, right? And it's like that type of treatment. And so it's like that's the introductory to prison for a lot of kids. And I've never seen that end in a productive way for children. When you have so many kids and the result is you don't have a pencil, get out, and security is called because you don't have a pencil, right? Or you rolled your eyes, or you're out of uniform, all of these things that build up and attribute to the school to prison pipeline, right? And so you're absolutely right. The presence of police officers in school just creates a sense of fear and intimidation for children. So
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I do want to talk about, though, your time during the Giuliani and Dinkins era. Um, oh yeah, I want to go there and talk about what policing was like in communities that look like mine.
Well, the biggest difference between the two mayors, Dinkins instituted the Community Police Officer Program, which is CPOP. A lot of people are familiar with that.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you remember Lee Brown. Lee Brown had come from Atlanta, and he had the community policing program in Atlanta. And he kind of brought that in. He actually had bounced around the country and been in a few departments, but he was supposedly like an expert with community policing. So Dinkins brought him in, and the entire philosophy there was to get, that whole cop on the beat and the officer familiarizing himself with merchants, with the residents on the block, so that they would disclose, or in confidence, or not, just come out and explain some of the problems going on in their community. And the officer is responsible to work in conjunction with all of those people I just mentioned and the community board to try and solve these problems through a non-enforcement way. So you're not just immediately going out making an arrest. You have to come up with some solutions where the public and the residents or the community themselves can be involved with trying to abate whatever criminal activity, or it didn't even have to be criminal. It could be someone that had, say, on certain blocks, they had lighting issues.
Mhm.
So you get the community police officer involved, and maybe he can contact the particular agency to see about getting, better lighting on a particular block or something like that.
So during the Dinkins era, there was a lot more of the community being involved,
Correct.
and collaboration with the police.
Absolutely. That is probably it in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and you have to remember, Dinkins was, and I hate to use this word, but a civilian, meaning he wasn't a prior law enforcement individual. He was a politician.
Mm-hmm.
So much easier for him to, I guess, transition, in running a police department and working with like the city council. I think because Dinkins had been a borough president. And I believe he was on the city council before, but I'm not quite sure. But he had at least been a borough president. So he knows how to work in conjunction with local communities.
Which is what we are till this day still trying to create across this country. So now in comes Giuliani, where I felt the shift growing up between Dinkins and Giuliani. And
oh my God.
Oh yeah, please talk about what policing was like in communities under the orders of Giuliani.
It was similar to what we're experiencing now with 45. In the sense that, and I say 45, we're talking.
Listen, I already know. So
where you have poor leadership, in the sense that a lot of the things that are instituted are more, again, inflammatory. So with Giuliani, him being a prosecutor, former prosecutor, he was way more law enforcement oriented, where arrests and things of that nature, and in the police in a law enforcement sense, with the public to solve crimes, was his theme and his goal. Because I don't know if you remember, he would announce that he had, he's going to have like this attack on quality of life crimes. Small things, like he went after like the squeegee guys, the guys selling flowers, some of the old timers that would always hang out on the street and playing dominoes, and
which tended to be people of color or immigrants.
Always people of color and in disenfranchised neighborhoods.
Yes.
So those are the people that he kind of went after. And that's not to say that in other communities that didn't go on. That people didn't just hang out outside and maybe engage in conversation while they were drinking and so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, and not to the point where it would be disruptive in their community. It was just a community thing,
Mm-hmm.
in particular in every neighborhood.
Was there ever an outright order on policing specific communities much harder than other communities?
No, everyone's trained to do the same thing, and it becomes as of like an age-old thing where it winds up being through the manipulation of numbers and stats to
Mm.
say, well, in the minority communities, crime is a lot higher, and we're going to now put a lot of pressure and attack these hot spots around the city
Mm.
in crime. And of course, that winds up being minority communities.
Mm-hmm.
These are so-called hotspots. And I think a lot of that has to do with, of course, more than just, um, the fact that people are just, quote, engaged in crime. It's the entire disenfranchisement of the diaspora. So
Yes.
you start taking away people's jobs. You have mass incarceration.
Exactly. That's what people don't understand.
Yeah.
Very,
It's a,
yes. So
it's a totality. It's not
yes.
just a single thing.
Exactly. People don't just decide, like, all these communities and decide, let's just start committing crimes, right? Let's sit around like, what can we do? Oh, we could just commit crimes, right? But you're right. It's it's the totality of what's happened over time. You don't provide enough jobs, or you put stipulations on, well, you were arrested before, so you can't get a job, right? Like, so now I'm limited in where I can get employment. You don't have healthy food in the neighborhood, so that already fuels the body a different kind of way and how people make decisions. And so, right, it affects the mind. And I always talk about that. And it just, even as an educator, I've always looked at the foods that my kids were coming into school with, eating hot Cheetos in the morning and drinking those little 25-cent waters that Lord know what's mixed in it, right? So, like, all those things
Sugar.
affect your development and your health, right? So you start looking at taking away resources in a community, jobs, healthcare, good food, all these things adding up, right? And also then when you put on top of that orders of, well, if you're going to go for welfare, the male can't live in the house, so now you're taking the fathers away in a different way. I mean, it's a buildup that eventually explodes, right? Like, that pressure has to be released somewhere, somehow. So what ends up happening now is, look, I got to feed my family. I can't get a job. I don't have access here. I can't get over there. I see somebody with it. I'm going to take it from them. And now that's where you start that cycle of crime. But our communities never said, oh, let's sit around and talk about how we should just commit crimes, right? Like, that is never the intent. Like, when you talk to people, even people who are incarcerated still have aspirations. They still have dreams of doing X, of becoming Y, right? So when I talk to people, they all have dreams and aspirations to become something and to do something positive with their life. And I say this even when I go into schools and I train teachers, and they just feel like, oh, they don't care, they don't want to. And I said, I have never in my entire life met anyone who woke up in the morning and says, I can't wait to be the worst person in the world. I can't. People don't aspire to that. Everybody has dreams of something: owning a home, getting maybe a certain type of car, saving up a certain type of money, being able to travel the world. Like, these are, different types of careers that people envision themselves in. Everybody has hopes and dreams, but everyone's path to get there is not the same.
Correct.
And our communities have always been at a disadvantage based on the policies and the laws that have been on the books forever.
And it becomes a thing of social bias. How, and I really hate to pigeonhole and say that it's just white cops, but it's how their social bias affects their
Mm-hmm.
policing ability.
Mm-hmm.
Minorities, of course, you're in a minority neighborhood, you see and you know how to recognize who's doing what, so to speak, and what type of social interactions are going on in the community between individual to individual, just people on the street. And I have to tell you a couple of funny stories, because you started off talking about how what the difference is between the policing styles, right? And if officers are trained to police one community differently over the other. Well, when I was I never planned on being a cop or joining the NYPD, not at all. But when I was about 19, I had two incidents with the police before I came on the job. The first, I used to work late at a movie theater, and I would get off from work late. Last show was at like midnight or something. So it's 1, 2 in the morning. You're riding the subway back home. And at the time I lived in Brooklyn, I get off the train, walk out the train station. And as I'm coming out, and a plainclothes officer jumps out of nowhere and he says, stop. He goes, put your hands up. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And I'm looking at the guy like he's crazy. And he goes, you just hopped the turnstile. I said, I'm leaving the train station. He goes, no, you just hopped the turnstile. I'm like, I'm leaving the train.
Walking out, right.
I'm walking out. How could you be walking out and hopping the turnstile?
Unbelievable.
Long and short of it is,
believable.
Barry Felder did not stick around for that one. And he wasn't quick enough to catch me. But
that's right.
The long and short of it is that in itself tells you that it's about numbers. He just saw a black face. It was late at night. I need to have a summons maybe written out or something, and this is the guy that's getting it right now.
Right. So there is a pressure for a quota. There's a quota that you have to meet.
They could say no, but there's a quota, and they started using semantics at some point to say the projected figures, but whatever.
Right, because police departments all around will deny it, and it's like enough people are related to police officers to know, right? And having these conversations like what you and I are having now, and even thinking about going back to the Giuliani era, that's when stop and frisk ballooned. He was a major proponent of stop and frisk. And in my experience, again, I can only speak about my experience, I didn't see white people being stopped and frisked, right? It not, and nowhere near, and not saying no white person ever got stopped and frisked. That's not what but it did not happen to white people the way it happened to black and brown people. It was like, again, these hashtags that we have, like walking while black, right? It's true. It's like, oh, well, they must be up to no good. There's two of them. Oh, yep, it's a gang, right? And so just throwing us up against the wall and searching us, and most times not finding anything, but trying to find a reason to bring us in. That's what I seen happen under Giuliani, and he was okay with that level of discrimination in our community.
I would have to say absolutely, and the the problem is that again it becomes a thing with chasing numbers, because stop and frisk always existed, and it goes back to a very old court case. They used to call them Terry stops, because the whole stop, question, and frisk came about through an incident that occurred in Ohio, Terry versus Ohio. And the long and short of it is there was a police officer on patrol, and he happened to see some suspicious activity, guys walking back and forth looking into a store, and he actually stopped them. And he stopped them, and he actually searched, because he suspected that they were, in the process of attempting to rob a store, So that's where the whole thing came from. And it was upheld in the courts that, an officer can do this. And then, of course, like anything else, it starts to become bastardized, that people will now take it just a little further. And it just kept going. And under Giuliani, when I talk about the numbers game, it became one of those things where you had to show that you conducted these stops a particular amount of times within a month. So you
So
have,
were officers penalized if they didn't show that they conducted a certain amount of stops?
well, you can't officially penalize someone for that. Unofficially, yeah, there are things that you can do as far as
Mm,
discipline goes, to try and bring people on board. You know, there's all kinds of creative things that supervisors can do if you have someone that isn't quote unquote going along with the program. But yeah, it became more of a numbers game just to show that yes, we're doing, these stop, question, and frisk, and of course, again, the hot spots were the minority communities. So yes,
mhm,
disproportionately, we were stopped over
mm,
white counterparts, and the numbers were really high. Uh,
mhm, mhm.
you know, uh, when Giuliani came in, you had like a 90% arrest rate increase and so on and so forth.
Right. And further trying to support or perpetuate the stereotype that we're dangerous, that Black and brown people are
Yes,
dangerous.
yes. And
And
that
and
has,
we're going to protect the white community and make sure that this city is a safe city, because we're going to go in those communities and clean it up.
and clean it up,
Yeah.
which is definitely again, an aggressive law enforcement style of police.
Hmm.
Um,
But and also, Barry, we have to say, right? Like, if then you have a mayor who is saying, "I will protect you if any suit was to come forward against you or the police department. Nothing will happen to you if you go in these communities and harass people. Nothing will happen to you if you go in and make false accusations and false arrests against these people. Nothing will happen to you when you kill people in these communities, because I will protect you." So what I've seen, and you can let me know if this is not true, but what in my experience has been that the behavior of police officers progressively got worse in Black and brown communities because they realized nothing's going to happen to me. I can kill these people, and their lives are seen as worthless. Nothing will happen to me. So I'm going to go in and do what I do. And hopefully some will, they do it to rise through the ranks or whatever, or to stay compliant, whether they believed in it or not, right? Because some people operate out of fear as well, and some people are like, yes, I've been waiting to do this. I mean, so uh, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's where the behavior and the engagement between communities, Black and brown communities, or communities have been disenfranchised, and the police have gotten worse.
Well, I agree with you in part, in the sense that, yes, the indemnification process and the examination of individual actions,
Hmm.
um, when you look at the hard numbers, you could say that, yeah, well, you were a lot more lenient during this time when it came to discipline for, say, abuse of authority, police misconduct, and so on and so forth, that the disciplinary actions were not as severe. And because the atmosphere and the climate at the time, of course, because you have a law enforcement mayor that is running the city, his goal and his objective is to bring things under control by force. And that is just a historical thing. We can go back till, day two after, emancipation, and you still have that same mentality where Black people have to be brought under control.
Hmm.
You just can't be treated the same as you can't be treated the same as the white community. You need to be under control.
Because we haven't been seen as human.
Yes,
From day one, we have never been seen as human. Then we were identified as 3/5 of a human.
yeah,
I mean, so, and then the term on our Black men have been super predators. I mean, we have all kind of names attached to us. And so then you have people, parents, who are passing this information on to their children, growing up believing these things. And then if they've never lived or worked, went to school with people of color, and particularly Black people, then what they see on TV is believed to be true, right? What they see on the news, like, people are
correct,
taught that if you saw it on the news, it's true.
correct,
You see it on TV, it's true. When we
correct.
know most of who's behind the TV screens and in Hollywood are white men.
Yeah, Yes.
So
Absolutely.
they're pushing out the message and what they want people to believe
Right.
about different groups of
It
people.
becomes more propaganda than
Yeah,
actual facts.
absolutely. So I do. So Barry, it makes me think about. I remember when I left New York City and I went to Florida, and the community I lived in, there was a mix. And there were people, you even had a lot of people who weren't American, but it was a mix of people in the community. But the building I lived in particular, was mainly white. Literally, there was about 5 Black people who lived in the building, and um, the other Black people who lived in the building were nannies or providers of some sort or security. And it was a very nice building, um and I noticed right away the interaction with the police and the community there was very different than what I experienced growing up in New York City. When I moved there, the police were saying hi, and I was scared. I would never get. I would look over my shoulder because I was like, "That's the setup. Oh my gosh, that's the setup." And I kept saying this, and I would keep looking back with this paranoia of, "Yep, they said hi to see if I'm that person. They're going to come get me," and I didn't do anything, right?
Correct.
But because growing up in New York City, like the police didn't come in our communities and say hi. Right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't acknowledged. Just like they come up and they're just throwing you up against the wall. They're accusing you of whatever. And when in my community, when the police come around, they're coming to either ticket you, arrest you, or you're lucky if you make it away with your life. That's the 3 outcomes. It's very rare that it's a conversation.
Correct.
But in this community that I moved to, the police officers were saying hi. And I started to know who they were, and that they knew who the people in the community were. And I never had that level of engagement, of civil engagement with the police. And living there for a few years, I almost forgot about what the experience was like growing up in New York City. And I know that had I lived in a more Black community, um, in Miami, that I would have likely not have been treated that way. And so what I took away from that is that I understand, having now lived on the other side, I understand why there's such a divide in the country about defunding the police versus not defunding the police. Because when you're living in a community like where I moved to, you don't have those interactions with the police.
Correct.
And so living there, after a while, that paranoia left because I didn't see that kind of behavior. I didn't see people being thrown up against the wall. People got pulled over when they ran the light,
And
or
that's not,
they,
there was no, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no,
That's
it's
not,
okay.
there's no crime where you live. There still could have been criminal activity. You just weren't aware of it. People just aren't being.
Exactly. And then I found out there was criminal activity in the building I lived in, and well-to-do people commit crimes, but how they were handled was very different. There wasn't a mockery of the community. There wasn't scenes in the community. Like I probably can think of maybe one scene over the 4 years that I lived in that building. Like it just, but it changed how it changed my understanding, or I should say, gave me insight into why and how people are like, what are you talking about? The police are here to protect. Like, they don't do anything. Because in that community, if that was my only interaction, I probably would have that same mindset.
Yeah. And you know what it is? You're
Mhm.
absolutely right. And across the country, of course, in white communities, there's that Norman Rockwell-ish kind of picture of law enforcement
Mhm.
and how they treat the community. And I have to tell you a funny story. When I was a rookie, I think I had a hot 3 months, out of the academy, and I was in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
on Utica Avenue, just hanging out, and it's a Sunday morning. Now you know how black folks are on Sunday morning.
Don't play with our church now.
It's a good morning. So I'm there. It's early Sunday morning. People are walking by,
Mm-hmm.
and you say good morning because first of all, I was raised that way. You
Yeah.
say good morning to people, especially.
That's more of a Southern thing because in New York, the Northerners, we look at you in New York like, don't talk to me. I don't know you. When I moved to the South, I was like, wait, why are people talking to me?
My folks are from the South, and
Yeah. See?
somebody look me in the face. You say good morning. You don't
Yeah.
just look back at them. You say good morning. Basically, I'm good morning. How you doing? So on and so forth. So there was a gentleman, and I guess because at the time, this is going back quite a few years. You have a black officer, young, on a foot post, just kind of hanging out, obviously talking to people and such. And the guy spoke to me for a few minutes. Then he shook my hand. He said, "Oh, it's nice to talk to you." Blah blah blah. As soon as he walked away, there was a unmarked car that came screeching up to a halt, and there were three guys in it, three white guys, and as it turns out, the lieutenant was in the car. They were all in plain clothes. He gets out. He comes over to me, and I thought maybe he wanted something. The guy chastised me to no end. He says, "Don't you dare shake anybody's hand. You don't know what these people are going to do to you." And blah, blah, blah. He just went on.
Wow.
Yeah, I could not believe that. And I just stood there. I didn't say one word. I just looked at him because, again, I'm a rookie. I'm new. I don't really know much of anything about the job. So I was like, okay. And, now, might use a phrase like somebody needs a nap. But I was like, at the time, I was like, so this is how you see,
Wow.
the people in the neighborhood, everybody, because the guy that I was talking to had just come from church. He was on his way to get breakfast. Guy's in like his Sunday best, going. I'm like, this guy's not a threat. He's not a threat to anybody.
Right. And it takes you back to, had you been in Manhattan, had you been up on Park Avenue and 81st Street, exactly.
Never would have happened.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
So it's almost like so even if you have officers that are coming in without that mindset, right? Because I don't believe every officer is coming in with that mindset. So if you have someone coming in without it, but then you have someone who is your superior who is telling you and training you to develop that mindset, I mean, it's disheartening to hear. And it's like you have people that are who are fearful of losing their jobs. They don't want to be blackballed. They don't want to be labeled. And so they go along with the status quo, even if in their core and their gut, they know it's not right.
Correct.
So,
and it's funny because obviously, thank God that guy was not, he wasn't a trainer. For me, it happened to be someone that worked in that precinct because I was actually assigned a foot post, but I worked someplace else. But it's just the idea that you would look at a black person in that way to say that they're a threat. And like I said, this guy, the gentleman I was talking to was clean cut. And I've been speaking to people all morning. I'm just standing there. I mean, you're walking up and down the street. What else do you do but talk to people?
And this is what the kind of relationship we want in our community. There's a misbelief where it's like, oh, well, I was watching a Fox, right? And one of their commentators or the guest on the show, and he said, actually, it was Bernard Carrick, I believe.
Okay.
Right, and who is a frequent guest commentator on Fox, and talked about, these people are trained to hate the police. And I was like, what? These people are trained to hate. So you get people who watch Fox, who watch that foolishness and actually believe that and think see, they're trained to hate us. They're trained to be like, there's no training in the Black community to hate the police. Like, there are white people who don't like police. There are Black people who don't like police. There are brown people who don't like police. Like, there are all kinds of people who don't like police. But for him to sit there and blanket statement to say that we are trained to hate the police, that is simply untrue. and given that it's a commentary show, but people, because it says news, they actually believe it's real. What they're like, all that you listen to is all commentary and opinionated base. But you have people that take that information in, they haven't engaged with Black people. That's the only thing they're watching and listening to. And so they
Right.
take that information as factual. When we want to be able to see the police as protection as well. We've been fighting for equality from day one. And so you have, I want to know from you, what do you believe at this point we can do to change the relationship between communities of color with the police?
Okay, well, a couple of things. One, to spring back to what you said about Carrick and their speaking about the Black diaspora, and say that we're trained to hate the police. If anybody did that training, it would have to be, the white supremacy in this country. Because when you look at it, that's the only negative. It's just a bunch of negative reactions. So if anybody did the training, it would have to have been you. But anyway, That's another story. But the long and short of it is as far as, and you have to remember too, when you talk about these interactions, with police, not all of the white police officers are that way. I've worked with a lot that were actually very understanding and had a cultural understanding of the Black community, but those were usually the cops that were born and raised in the city. Every single one I could think of off my head that had a very soft relationship with the community, raised in the city.
So I will ask you, real quick, as you mentioned that. And so I've always believed, if we have more representation of people that look like us policing our communities, that the relationship, right, will improve. Now, I must also say we've also see Black cops who are engaging in this type of behavior towards Black people.
Yeah.
We can't escape it. Yeah. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, part of that is I have to use the old age-old term, internalized depression. And we wind up hating ourselves sometimes and trying to assimilate into white culture. And it's a place you don't belong. Just be yourself. You're Black, you have a Black history, you have a Black culture, which you're not really taught much about that unless you learn it on your own. So what winds up happening is you try and fit into a slot that really isn't yours. So you're better off just trying to be yourself and get along with folks as you are. You're Black. There's nothing wrong with being Black, and relate to people on that level. You don't have to think about any kind of appropriation, cultural appropriation or things of that. You don't have to do that. Just be yourself. And you'll be fine in the Black community. And I think that also people, like you had mentioned earlier, are fearful of losing their jobs. They kind of go along with the status quo, even though they know or may know in their officer going to do, you feel like you're kind of pigeonholed. You have to protect yourself, protect your job. You have an investment at home.
So is there punitive discipline if an officer speaks out against the behavior of another officer? Do you find like that's the pressure on Black officers?
No. Not necessarily on any officer that speaks out. But what happens is you have more of a Frank Serpico type of atmosphere. For those that don't remember Frank Serpico, he was the one that first spoke out in like the 70s about police corruption. So you find yourself being alienated. Your peers want nothing to do with you. And there may be some silence, whereas you may walk into a locker room, nobody's around you. You will get an assignment, you go out. Your day can be very long when you have to work by yourself.
Got it.
You can't do 20 years like that or 20 plus years. You cannot do that. It's not.
Do you think that is what really, I don't want to say really, but that's probably a factor in the assimilation.
Yes, and I think that that would work. That would be on any job. You could work in an office, have a cubicle, and if you somehow alienated yourself or made a comment or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, the other, say you worked in an office with 20 people and the other 19 said, we are not going to deal with this person. We're not going to talk to them or anything like
Yeah.
that. You work every day and it's just you. You walk into a room, everybody else walks out. You walk into like a lunchroom or a break room, a little
Yeah.
coffee or something. That could be a really, really tough career.
Well, yeah, unless you're me, where I'm like, yes, leave me alone. I actually would like it. But so, Barry, let's go back to three things. I want you to sum up what are three things that we can do, police and the community, to come together to start to improve the relationship between police and civilians.
Well, I think the first thing is that the departments, the police departments around the country, we have to stop using terms and terminology that is offensive or that
Mm.
actually sounds aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to, put it off that you have to have a set of kid gloves, but you look back, even through like going back like the Nixon era, you had
Mm-hmm.
the war on drugs, the war on crime, the war on terrorism, war.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a war, that means you have one side against the other side. So
Yes.
you cannot use that type of language
Yeah.
because it incesses people and they don't want that, and it makes it worse and empowers the law enforcement personnel to think that they have to battle when
Mm-hmm.
they go out. It's not
Mm-hmm.
my job to battle when I go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hey, what did Mike Tyson used to get for his fights? 3, 4, 20 million or something like that. I'm
Right.
not going out to fight to fight like that. I'm not
Yeah.
getting that kind of money. So I think that you need to find a better language with people. And as far as the community goes, I think you need people to become a little more active in ele-
Mm-hmm.
their local
Oh,
elections. Hold these
yes.
local people accountable. Put pressure
Yes.
on them.
I
And
tell people, especially younger people, all the time, you should not be voting once every 4 years.
correct,
Right. And that the local seats are actually more important than the presidential seat, because
right,
it starts at the local level and it starts building up from there on then who is responsible for putting who in the seat. You vote for the mayor in New York City, then he's going to appoint the commissioner. He's going to appoint the chancellor of education. Like, these are the things that you need to know. We have judges that then get appointed. You have DAs in those seats, and these are the people making the laws and administering those sentences. And so we're saying that these guidelines are harsh, but we have to first educate ourselves on who these local elected officials are and show up at their office, call the office, write letters to the office. You hold them accountable. You want our vote. What are we getting in return for the vote? Right. And so because we don't do this, our community is constantly exploited because of the lack of knowledge there.
correct.
Yeah. So I
So,
agree with you. So we got to change the language, number one, because you change the language, you change how people start to view you.
correct.
Um, Number two is getting involved, like voting uh, locally for your local elected officials. And
hmm
what do you think the third thing is?
It goes back to education again. And, I think I had told you once before on the side that we need societal reconstruction. And that's from Dr. Martin Luther King. So, yes, you need to teach uh, all communities the true history of how things evolve. Like you mentioned about Carrick and, oh, these people are trained to hate us. That never occurred. But because Black
Mm-hmm.
people have been subjugated, for a very long time, physically, mentally, and then on top of it, there are all other sorts of crafty ways that things have evolved through the centuries. More sophistication has come about, so I think that you need education and people need to know their history
Yes.
Eliminate, like, people are upset. It's funny. I talked to a friend of mine the other day, and he's like, and he actually happens to be white, and he was talking to me about the statues. He goes, "Oh, it's a terrible thing, and they're tearing down these statues." I was like, "Why?" I was like, "The first person on my list is Christopher Columbus." I was like,
Hello, slaughterer, murderer.
committed genocide across the Caribbean,
Right.
across the Caribbean, and then
Right.
keep doing the same thing.
Didn't even know where he was. That's
Didn't know it. I
that's a
still
whole
remember
other
the whole
story.
bit. I was like, so I says, how can you have
Mm.
a statue or honor someone like that? What did he really do? I
Right.
mean, it's a godly thing. It's supposed to be a God-fearing country. You ask God to bless America.
Mm.
You had better turn around and start blessing God.
Right.
So, things like that. We need education.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And to believe like, oh my gosh, it's a terrible thing to take down the statues of the oppressor. For them, it's not their oppressor. So it's not something they have to think about. Like we walk by that statue and you see it and your first response is, right. And it's like that because that it's the constant reminder for us. Right.
And
And
that was the purpose behind the erection to begin with.
exactly.
To remind you, yeah.
Exactly. To remind you that you will never be equal. You will always be inferior. And don't forget who's really in charge. That's what white people don't understand when they start saying, well, some white people, let me be clear on that, right? That's what some white people don't understand when they're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Like, but that was a good pushback on you on like, well, how is this terrible? Like, what has he done? What has he done that's so positive?
Because most certainly we would not want a statue of Hitler.
Thank you.
Would
Exactly. Why aren't you for that? Right. And then you're absolutely right. We would never have that a statue of Hitler erected and be okay with that. But when it comes to us, everything is questioned. Everything is, oh, they're overreacting. They need to get over it already. Slavery happened so long ago. They need to just move on from that. I didn't do it. That was my ancestors. They need to get over it. Everything is, we always need to get over it and move on. But other groups, they're never told they have to get over it
well,
ever.
there's two things there. One, as far as the statues go, people forget that when we invaded Iraq, U.S. soldiers tore down the statue, but
Mm,
the Iraqis tore down the statue of Saddam Hussein. Forget about
wow.
that, right?
I actually did.
This came down, right? Tore it right down.
Right.
You and as far as the getting over the whole slavery thing,
Mm.
there's a couple of people I've often made this analogy that you can't ask someone who is a rape victim to get over the
Oh,
rape.
listen, I said this the other day to somebody, like, how you would never say that to someone, right, who has been a victim or to get over it. Oh, and especially like, oh, well, the killer's never been brought to justice, so you just need to move on, right? That's what's happening in our community. Like, we have not had justice, so we cannot move forward. We do not get spaces where we get to talk about the repeated hits of trauma in our community. And so it's like we have an open wound that continues to be hit over and over, and that wound just keeps expanding. It never had an opportunity to heal. Right.
Correct.
And then we get a couple of years during the Reconstruction era, right? And it's like, okay, maybe we can start to heal. And then it gets open all over again. That same wound gets hit over and over again. And that's where the trauma comes. So what eventually, and I was speaking to a therapist on the show a couple of weeks ago, and asking her, so what happens when people don't have the space to talk about it? She's like, well, it just goes, it finds different places in your brain, and then it will come out anywhere and anytime in any manner.
Right.
And I said, well, that's exactly what's happening in our community now.
Yeah.
Right. And then we're told how we should express it. Right. And it's like when that rage just starts pouring out because that wound has been open for so long, it's like we're trying to put a band-aid on something that's hemorrhaging. And our community is hemorrhaging.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's one of those things where, of course, the same person that you spoke about that may say, oh, well, slavery happened a long time ago. You got, black people need to get over it and such. That very same person is the individual that won't learn anything about
Hmm.
black history or
Yeah.
yet about their own history.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And so because to know something means to do something.
Yeah.
So people don't want to be held responsible to do something. So if I remain ignorant on this, then I'm not
I'm
accountable.
pretty clear.
Exactly. When that's not an excuse and you're still being held accountable and you're reaping the benefits of your ancestors and what they've done. And as long as you continue to sit in those spaces and say nothing, your silence is just as bad as the people who are outright inflicting the harm upon our community. And so I hear these comments all the time like, oh, everything doesn't have something to do with race, right? And so, granted, every single thing is not about race. However, every place we breathe, race is a part of it.
Correct.
Every place Black people breathe, race has been a part of it. And because the people who say that the most are white people.
Yeah.
When they say, oh, everything has nothing to do with race, because you're not experiencing it. We are.
Right. It's total different dynamic, and the establishment of your economic status and your social status for you,
Right.
race is still a part of it. You're
Right.
just on the plus side. So,
Right.
when you think about all of the government programs that help establish the white middle class,
Yes.
the forefront, as opposed
Yes.
to the other way around for us, with
Exactly.
the black, quote, black middle class, or the establishment of any kind of black wealth or stabilization,
Mm-hmm.
it goes on the other side, on the negative side. So all of that, like you said, people have a tendency to forget. They don't want to know. And knowledge, of course, like you said, means action. And it's like, if I can just feign ignorance or be ignorant, then I'm good.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things, I keep mentioning education, but for me, if they ever did decide to issue reparations, that's what they need to do. They need to have that money go specifically to education.
Absolutely.
Talk with us and then move on to the white
Absolutely.
community and
Yeah.
let people know what really happened.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And there is a certain level of ignorance, like innocence, ignorance, in meaning the dictionary term, where there are white people who don't know because they haven't had to live the life. So they grew up in a community of people that look like them. They went to school with people that look, so they didn't have to experience. So why, like, they didn't have to learn any history other than one lady I spoke to, she said it just stopped at World War II. And the teacher was like, oh, that's all we have time for. And she said, I literally learned nothing else. So she left school like, oh, that's history, other than what she's living through now in her time. Right. And so I'm thinking about, yes, there are people like her. So when she's hearing these stories, she's like, wait, what's been happening? Because you have to also think about, depending on where you live as well, you only get a certain type of news that's streamed to you.
Yeah.
Right. So so if this is what's streamed and that's all they're showing on the news, or it's like you hear one story here and there, it doesn't seem like it's perpetuated over and over again. It doesn't seem like it's something that's saturated in our community. It just seems like, oh, okay, yeah, a Black man was killed by a police officer. Oh, okay, I saw another story a few months down the road. Okay, oh yeah, well, they did say Black people are violent, so and then people just move on with their lives. But having been home to witness that the atrocity of and the atrocious, hideous lynching of George Floyd really had people like, hold up. And the fact that he had his hands in his pocket and you can just see he was soulless, like nothing in his eyes. People, I mean, you white people were outraged. People all over the globe were like, that is just absolutely disgusting. And for the Black people, we were like, this is what we've been trying to tell y'all forever, that
For
this
decades.
is normal in our community.
Yeah, for decades.
Right. Like, this is normal for us. This happens to us way more than you know. It just so happened that one was filmed.
What's funny? We live in now, obviously, in the age of technology, and where communication through the media is like instant.
Mm-hmm.
But I read a very interesting book a couple of months back there, and it centered around Hitler and how he opted to subjugate the Jews, and where he looked to pick his information and turn to America, to the antebellum South, and how through crafty laws and through force, Black people were brought under subjugation. So he actually did kind of look And the name of the book is called Hitler's American Model. And it's very interesting. You read that book. It's like,
Wow.
I mean, not everything, obviously, because this is during the rise of the Socialist Party
Yeah.
in Germany at the time. But he really looked to the South and to the United States and the laws that they had on the books regarding Black people and minority communities, the establishment of ghettos, and so on and so forth. And he used part of that because he actually had emissaries come over. He had people coming over to this country to read, study, and so on and so forth. And I just use him as an example to say, reinforce what you were saying about this has been going on for a long time, and how the world now is outraged by what they see. But they've always showed a little disdain for America and its hypocrisy that abroad you try and say, oh, we're going to liberate this country, we're going to liberate these people, we're going to do this, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
It's total false advertisement because you haven't done it for yourself.
Exactly.
False
Right. You're absolutely right. And so I'm totally with you on that. We definitely need to start these conversations and start having conversations with people who don't think like us. It's tiring. It's exhausting. It is. I know how tiring it is to have these conversations with people who don't share the same thoughts that I do, beliefs, values, and culture. But if we want to live like this for another 400 years, then we'll end up staying in our circles. If we want to live if we want to truly have liberation, then we got to make the time to have conversation. You have some people that they just are so deep-seated and they want to continue the ignorance. And you have people that I've actually met who said, I'm starting to realize that things I've been told growing up don't make sense. No. And they don't know what the truth is, but they're saying it doesn't feel right inside of them.
Correct.
And I said, you go with that feeling. Yeah. I said, because internally, you know what's right and what's wrong. And so those are the people I want to start to have conversations with who didn't grow up the way I grew up and, are realizing something's not right. I don't know what it is, but I know this isn't right. And I think once we can have those conversations and develop understanding, we develop a different outlook and attitude towards people that we see that are different from us.
Yeah, and I think that, again, speaking of education and going back to like the police departments, I think that there too, having, because they do have it on some level, but it's very small, cultural training. And one of the things that I used to listen to, or one of the people I used to listen to quite a few years back there was Dr. Edwin Nichols. He was an industrial psychologist, and he actually would go into different workplaces and try and explain to the employees, I guess through like the human resources, to get them to understand the different types of diversity that you have and what people are like. And I'm going to give you an example that he used in one of his tapes. You have, usually with us, we always say good morning. We walk into an office, hey, good morning, how you doing? And so on, because things for us are more important with a relationship.
Communal and very much about relationships for us, yes.
And usually people of color are that way.
Yeah.
However, it's a place of business, another set come in.
A lot more operational.
It's all operational. I don't have to say good morning to you. I just walk in, you're at your desk. I need this, I need that. It's like, whoa. I didn't sleep with you last night.
Exactly.
So, there becomes that dynamic, and it creates a little bit of a schism there because now emotions take off. The other person is like, well, I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you a good morning.
So we sitting in like, what's your problem, right?
That type of cultural clash needs to be examined on
I agree.
In every job, but with the police in particular, because they have to interact with so many different people, and they're responsible in an authoritarian position, authoritative position. They're responsible to a community. Yes, they need to have that kind of training. Dr. Joy, I don't know if you know who Joy Leary is.
No, I don't.
Dr. Joy Leary DeGrew. She's a student of Dr. Nichols, and she does that type of training with the police departments around the country, and she will go from department to department. But these things wind up costing money. So you can either be, what I say, penny wise, dollar
Penny
foolish.
wise, pound foolish.
Yeah. So you can do that, or you can, just continue to pay out tons of money in lawsuits for wrongful deaths.
Exactly. And it's
a lot of money.
Oh my gosh. The same thing in education, right? It's like you can get people the proper training or continue to pay out millions of dollars in lawsuits for negligence in not providing students the services that they were entitled to under the law. But I'll say this as we wrap up. I have a friend who does trainings in prisons, working with correction officers on their mindset and how they view the prisoners. And what they've been doing is they've been doing this research and monitoring how many inmates have ended up placed in solitary confinement, right? So they're calling it extractions, cell extractions is how they're labeling it, right? And then they're comparing that data to after the training with the correction officers, after the training with this person or this organization on their mindset about how they're viewing prisoners and how they're treating them. After getting this training, they're now looking at the data to see what those cell extractions numbers are. And one of them, I don't remember the exact number, but it was so gross. Prior to the training, cell extractions were literally like 350 a month, right? And this was just like in one place. After the training, 1 a month.
Really? Wow.
And it was, my friend called me and she was like, oh my gosh, this is work that you would totally love to be a part of. And she was showing me letters from correction officers where they were like, oh my goodness, thank you. I didn't realize it was me. I didn't realize that I was increasing the frustration and the behaviors in the prison with the inmates. And that one correction officer in particular wrote her this letter and shared that he was not for this training at all, but came around and realized how it was not just impacting his job, but his behavior was impacting his marriage.
Yeah.
And how after listening to her and just trying the things that she was saying, that the relationships and the behavior in the prison improved amongst inmates and inmates with correction officers, and realizing and he admitted in the letter that I did think that they were beneath me. I did look at them that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you treated them that way because that's the mindset that you had about them. So I think about, wow, how powerful is that, right? Like the people already are incarcerated. Well, like, why do you need to make the living conditions even worse, right? And so why do we need to treat people as they're inhumane? Like it's so unnecessary. So I just think about that training that organization is doing and how powerful it is if that training is expanded to departments all across this country, which I actually would love to connect with them to find out more about how they are going to get involved to help with those types of trainings, because you're right. And I just think about how powerful that is when we start to have these conversations and get people to a place of understanding. And we do that through education and relationship building.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Training is a whole nother day.
Yeah, I know. Barry, I had such a great conversation with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I know there's a book that you did say that you would love for the listeners to be able to go out and get, and it was The Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. Is that correct? Yeah. And just real quick, what is that book about, and why do you think people definitely need to read it?
Well, the book, which again, I think was written like in the 40s or the 50s, is about a medical doctor that injects himself with melanoma to change his skin color. He's white, and he, over the course of time and his travels, after he takes these injections, travels across the country and has these different types of experiences, particularly in the South, and heading out west with communities and law enforcement. And he sees and recognizes the disparaging treatment that Black people and people of color suffer. Because by the time he was at the end of his journey, his skin was completely dark. And he constantly was in contact, phone contact with his wife, who, of course, is worried about him on this journey. And he's expressing to her a lot of his fears as he now continues his journey across country. And it's very interesting. I mean, like I said, from not being able to get into particular hotels as he's traveling because he's a person of color, to actually being roughed up and beaten by the police in certain instances. So it's a really good book, and I think that people should read it and kind of understand it.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a powerful book. I'm going to give you one last word on giving our listeners some advice or a tip on what to do when stopped by the police.
I thought about that. It's really difficult to say because over the last several years, we've had people that were abused and in some cases killed by the police that were completely compliant and followed every rule in the book. So it's very difficult to say what someone should do. But the basic thing is if you're stopped by the police, just remember, if you've done nothing wrong, don't put yourself in a position and second guess your own actions to say, did I do something wrong? Like, what did I do? Did I make a bad thing back there? Don't create that atmosphere in your own mind. Just be confident and calm and compliant with whatever directions that you're given, which is usually has been the case. And, you don't want to agitate the officer, which is something you talk about training. That's something that we were trained to do from way back when. If you have any police encounters, don't set them off. So I would strongly suggest that people just remain calm, confident, and compliant.
Yeah. And when you say if you have police encounters, don't set them off, meaning on the police side, you've all been trained. Now you're talking about just in the Black community, we're trained not to agitate the police.
No, I mean, as a person of color, we're trained.
Oh, yes.
Not to agitate.
Right.
Not to agitate.
Absolutely.
Don't use words or phrases or things that you may think that may necessarily, just on a human basis, make someone angry or become agitated with you. And of course, watch your tone. In the sense, and it kind of floats back to, in a sense, you feel like you're, especially as an adult. If you're a man who's in his 50s or he's 60s or say a 70-year-old man, you're a senior person in society and you have some young officer that you have to kind of scrape to and soften him up. That's not your job, really, to soften up this person to prevent them from actually acting in a professional manner.
Yeah.
That's his responsibility.
Yep.
So that's why I said it becomes very difficult to tell people.
No, you're absolutely right, because it's hard at this point. Like, what else do we tell our children when we have witnessed people following everything they're told and don't even make it out with their life? And so that's very hard. And I don't know what else to say around what to do. And this is a quick story I'll tell you that goes back to where I was living at when I had moved to Florida, the building I was living at. And I remember one night I came home from work. My flight came in really late, ended up delayed, and I didn't get home until about 3 a.m. So I was extremely exhausted because a 2-hour flight turned into a 9-hour flight. And then I had worked already 7 hours during the day. So needless to say, I just wanted to get home, and I had actually parked at the airport So when coming home, there is a where I was living, there was the stoplight turns yellow at a certain time of night,
Well,
right? And so because traffic slows down a lot in that community, and it's off the beaten path, meaning it was a community where you only are driving in there if you live in there. There's no outlet in there. So if you're in there, it's because you live there. So the street light turns to yellow. So I was driving and there's a stop sign, and it was blinking the yellow. And so I didn't realize I didn't come to a full stop at that stop sign. And I slowed down and made the turn to go into the building. And then flashing lights are behind me. I'm like, oh, what the hell? Because I'm so tired. It's 3:30 in the morning. And so I knew right away I'm going to drive the extra 10 feet to pull into the building where there are cameras. Because had I stopped right there on the street before I pulled into the driveway of the building, there would be no witnesses. But again, see the programming for us, right? And so I knew to pull there for safety because there's 24-hour security in the building and there's cameras all over. So I pull in and the officer comes over and he asks, immediately I have my window down and my hands out where he can see them before he even speaks to me. And so then he asked me for my license and registration. And I was like, it's in the glove compartment. I have to reach for it. Is that okay? Like, you can shine your light in and look to see, there's nothing else in my glove. And I'm like going down a whole list of all these things with him. And he was like, okay, you can get it. So then he goes, well, I stopped you because you didn't come to a complete stop. You did a rolling stop. And I said, okay. And he was like, where are you coming from? I said, from work, from the airport. And he was like, oh, you work at the airport? I said, no, I just flew in. And he was like, there are flights coming in at this time? Yes. I said, my flight came in very late. It was delayed. Well, where are you coming from? Ohio. Why were you in Ohio? I was working. You work in Ohio? So why are you in this neighborhood? And then he's looking around, right? And I said, I live here. And he doesn't even look at the license yet, right? He has it in his hand, and he goes, you live here. And the tone was almost like, you don't live here. There's no way you can afford to live here, right? It was that like, you live here? And yes. Are you a nanny here?
wow.
No, I live here. And I just told you I flew in from Ohio from work. And then he goes, oh, what do you do? And I said, I'm an executive coach. And he goes, oh. Then he looks at the license. He looks at the building, sees the address matches. And he goes, oh, you really do live here? Yeah, I do. And then his exact words were, you must work really hard. Gave me back my license and registration, says, the next officer wouldn't be as nice to you. Be careful on these streets. I was like, I could not have pulled into the driveway any faster.
Nice.
Yeah.
After you got the third degree. I mean, it's one thing to make an inquiry with someone, but I'll be honest with you. Again, you can see where there had to obviously have been some sort of cultural bias going on there, because
absolutely,
why would you not look at the person's license? That's like one of the first things you do. The person gives you a license, registration, insurance, make sure everything matches up, look at them. And if you want to pry and say, just ask someone, say, well, where are you coming from? And they say, oh, I'm coming from X, Y, and Z. Okay, just sit tight here for a few minutes. And
he didn't even run it at that point and I was like, I have my plane ticket in my pocketbook if you want to see that. Like, I have no, but the mindset was, it's 3:30 in the morning. You don't see many Black people in this building unless you're doing service here. So what are you doing here? And that was really the mindset of that officer. And so I just think about, had I not changed over my license and I still had a New York license, I probably would have been taken. I probably would have been taken into jail.
Yeah, you would have.
He would have found a reason.
Yeah. And the thing about it is you're a single female in the middle of the night by yourself. What
right
criminal activity could you possibly engage Unless
Right.
you're not a secret hit woman,
Right. Right.
activity you would have been involved in.
I'm like, oh my gosh. No, you're absolutely right. So yeah, these are the beginning steps to start to heal and build trust and respect, because there's no respect in our community, for our community, I should say. There's no respect for our community. And so we need to start to rebuild the trust and the respect, and look at different ways of starting to bring our community together to get to a place where we actually feel protected and respected by the police, and know that when we call, that we're really calling for help and not for our death sentence.
Correct. You're
So,
absolutely right.
Barry, such a great conversation. I know we can talk about this for another 2 hours. Please do not be a stranger. You are always welcome to come back on this show and share a lot more of your insight. I appreciate you. Thank you again for coming on. And
You're quite welcome. I'll get some better lighting.
listen, yeah, we could still see it's mood lighting. And to you all out there, thank you again for joining and listening in to another week with me and L3. Same place, same time next week as well. Take care, love yourself, and love the people around you. Peace.
Peace.